to be humble when we ask God for favors, when we ask God to help us. And the first thing we do is we come and we bring God, we tell him, this is what we do in the Amidah. And we also do it in the early morning, after the morning brachot. First thing we tell God, remember the merits of our parents. In other words, we might not be perfect. We are humble, but we come on the backs of giants. We come to God in the merit of our parents. We had good parents, good grandparents, good great-grandparents. Jews going all the ways back to the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. They were perfect. They were good. And so we come to God in their merit. And that's why every day in the prayers, we always say, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And when we start now, the morning prayers, one of the first sections that we speak about is, you can follow on page 12 at the bottom. We say to God, our God, the bottom paragraph, our God and God of our fathers, remember us favorably before you, and be mindful of us for deliverance and mercy from evil, most supernal heavens. Remember in our behalf, Lord our God, the love of the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants. The covenant. So this is something that we mention to God. We remind him of the covenant with Abraham, and the covenant with Isaac, the covenant with Jacob. And what we're basically saying is to Hashem, remember our forefathers. And then we go on into the whole story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, how Abraham brought his one and only son, Isaac, unto the altar. And then God told him, I will bless you and bless your children and your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren after you. They will be as many as the stars of the heaven, and they will be my people. So this was the covenant of God that began at the binding of Isaac. And that's why we read about the binding of Isaac here. So this is a very important section that we read, and we come to Hashem and we say, Hashem, before we even start anything, you have to realize whom we are holding on to the coattails of. We're holding of the coattails of our parents. Many years during the Holocaust, my parents, actually, my mother survived from a place called Tomashov. That's where her family came from. But she was born in a city as they were running away from the Nazis. She ended up in the city of Lvov, which those days was known as Lemberg. And they were lucky enough that after the Nazis bombed Lvov, my mother was actually born in that city of Lemberg, in the hospital in 1940, when the Germans were bombing that Polish-Ukrainian city. And so I'm a result of this miracle, if you follow. So my mother and her family, it's my Zayda and Baba, they had my mother, the baby was born. Then afterwards they ran to Russia, to the east. And Baruch Hashem, they were spared. But those that were remained in that town of Lviv, of Lemberg, they were brought to the outskirts of the city, to Yanovska Street. And that's where there was a camp. It was known as the Yanovska camp. And they had there a camp where all these survivors, the ones that were left over in that city of Lviv, they were taken to. And in this Yanovska camp, there were many, many Jews that were herded there and brought there into that area. And as we know, in the Ukraine and in Western Poland, they didn't waste time with the Jews, taking them to concentration camps and then taking them to work and things like that, but instead, they just shot them to death. And they would use, like they did in Babi Yar, they would dig this major trench, and they would throw the Jews into the trench, and then they would, as the Jews fell in one on top of the other, they would shoot them to death. And in this Yanovsky camp, the Nazis were totally cruel and cynical, and they decided to play a game. The game was that they'd line up the Jews by this major trench that they dug into the ground where all the Jews were falling in one after the other. And they told the Jews, if you jump over the trench from one side to the other, we'll let you live. But if you don't make it, then we shoot you to death. So most of the Jews couldn't make it to the other side, and they were just, unfortunately, shot and piled one on top of the other in the trench. But some Jews who were lucky, they were able to make it to the other side. So they had this major lineup, and people were walking down this major lineup, and they were able to hear the Nazis laughing and shouting and shooting, and they heard the piercing shouts of the cries of the people as they were jumping over this trench in Yanovska. And on this line were all kinds of Jews. The Kloisenberger Rebbe once said, there was no such thing on the line to the death row, to the concentration camps, or to the death camps, or to the crematoriums, or to these death trenches. There was no such thing as a religious Jew, a secular Jew. We were just Jewish. The Kloisenberger Rebbe once said, I miss those days. In other words, when there was no difference between Jews. So on this line, in the camp, in 1942, 43, somewhere around there, walking in the line was a young Rebbe who was known as the Bluzhever Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Spiro. He's walking on this line towards what they thought was for sure going to be everyone's going to die. And next to him is a young, walking next to him is a young secular Jew who wasn't religious at all. And he's walking with the rabbi, and they're talking to each other. The Rebbe was a very warm man, and he spoke to him and gave him some encouragement. And the Rebbe said, we have to believe things will be good, we'll survive. He said, the Rebbe, it's impossible. Look at this line. Look what's happening. Everybody's falling into the trenches. There's no way we're going to survive. The Rebbe tells him on the way, he says, have faith. Have faith. The guy says, I'll try my best. And they're walking, and they hear the Nazis shouting and screaming, Juden, gay, life. And they're mamish at the edge of the trench. And then they hear the Nazis shooting the gun. And the Nazis scream, all the Jews, jump, jump. And the Rebbe jumps. And the secular Jew jumps. And they make it to the other side. Both of them miraculously make it to the other side of the trench. They survive. Incredible. So the young man, the young secular Jew says, Rebbe, you're not such a youngster. How did you make it to the other side? You're not fit. You're a rabbi. The Rebbe says, when I was going across, I saw the image of my father, who was a Rebbe before me, and his father, who was a Rebbe before him, and his father, who was a Rebbe before him, and I was holding on to their coattails, and they schlepped me across to the other side. But the Rebbe says to the other Jew, tell me, how did you make it across? The young Jew said, Rebbe, I made it across because I was holding on to your coattails. The Rebbe schlepped the other Jew across. He was holding on to his coattails. The faith that he had, that the Rebbe had given him, helped him get across to the other side. And so it is when we come to daven to Hashem. We don't come in our own merits. Our own merits are maybe not so many, but we come from good stock. We come from Woodstock. That's what we come from. We come from good schoira. We come from good parents and grandparents. And maybe we can't make it across the ditch. We can't make it across the trench ourselves. In life, there's a trench. And there, wherever we go, there are Nazis shouting at us and screaming at us, telling us to jump. But if we have the right faith, it's called a leap of faith, right? We hold on to our parents and grandparents to help us across. So we come to Hashem, we come to pray. What are we praying? We're praying that Hashem should help us and help us, because you are the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. They were good folks. They were good people. Yeah, we're also, some of us are good too. I'm not saying we're all rotten. I'm not saying we're all losers. We're also good people. We also have a lot of merits, but way more when you have they tell the story of a very short guy that he couldn't. They wanted the whole group of Jews. They wanted to see what was on the other side of the fence. They couldn't see. So the little short guy jumped on the back of the very tall guy, and then he put his head over and he was able to see what's going on the other side. So our generation is like the generation, we're like the midgets, we're short people. We don't have so much, but we are on the back of giants. And that is the key to our merits in life. When we know we walk on the backs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's why we find this thing starting from Moses. Moses also came to God and says, when the Jews sinned with the golden calf and many other times, he always says, remember where we come from. But in order to have the merits of our parents, we have to make sure that we keep the chain going. In other words, we are a chain. We're like a golden chain of the Jewish people. But we need to continue that chain. We need to be tapped into that chain. We get the merits of our parents when we jump on their back. We have to believe that our parents were great. We have to believe that in the continuity, and that we want to maintain that link. And that's why in Jewish life, we always speak about our heritage and our past. And we always speak about Zachor, to remember, not to forget them. We have Yizkor, we have a Kaddish, we have a different prayers throughout the year to remember our parents and our grandparents. Because because we believe that it's one long continuum. The story of the Jewish people is an unfolding story. And that is also one of the great forms of comfort. Sometimes we see certain generations, a lot of tzaddis and a lot of things. But if you look at us as a big picture, as a continuation, then you know that. And that's why we also believe in the coming of the Mashiach. Why are we going to merit to have Mashiach when all the previous generations didn't merit? Because we are them. We are our parents. We are our grandparents. We are their DNA. We are a continuation of their soul. And every generation we continue We continue that tradition. Just give me 1 second, please. We are called the people of Israel. That's what we're called. We're called the people of Israel because we are a continuation of Israel. If you look at the word Israel, you'll see that really when we call ourselves Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, what we call the land of Israel, we call the Jewish people Israel. That's our key name. If you look at the word of Israel, you'll see that Israel is made up of all the patriarchs and matriarchs together. Like I say, we always speak about their merits. So whenever we say Am Yisrael Chai, may the Jewish people live on forever, the name Yisrael, it really has within it all the patriarchs and the matriarchs. That's what makes up Israel. Our respect for where we come from. And when you know where you come from, then you know where you can go to. You need to know your heritage. Now, there was a story once of somebody that was lost in the forest, and they didn't know where to go. They're walking and walking. Finally, they come to some kind of crossroads, and they don't know where they're going. And they see a sign pointing to the direction. So they did, but they didn't know where to go because the sign had fallen down. So the sign was useless. But then one guy in the group said, smart guy, he said, let's take the sign, and it usually on the sign, it points one way in all directions, right? So we know where we came from. So let's put the sign pointing to where we came from, and then we'll know where we're going to. Because most of the signs, they have like arrows in each direction. So he said, we know where we came from. So if you point to where you came from, then you can figure out where you're going to. So that was the brilliant idea. And the same thing is in life. If you know where you're coming from, then you can figure out where you're going to. You have to know how to put the sign inside, and you know where you're going back. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. Now I was saying the word Israel is a composite of all the first letters of all the Hebrew names of Avrohom, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. So you take the name Yisrael, that's the Jewish people. First letter of Yisrael is Yud. Yud stands for which one of the patriarchs? Yitzchak and Yaakov. Yud for Yitzchak and Yud for Yaakov, right? That's the first letter, Yud. Then take Yisrael. So the next letter is a sin, Shin, right? So that stands for which one of the patriarchs?
Sarah.
Sarah, right? The matriarchs, Sarah. So that's the second. So far we have 3 out of the 7, right? The next letter is Yisrael. The Reish stands for 2 of the matriarchs, is Rivka and Rachel, right? So we have already 5. And Aleph stands for who? Which one of the patriarchs?
Avrohom.
Avrohom, very good, Avrohom, right? And Lamed is for Leah. So we have Yud, Shin, Reish, Aleph, Lamed. The name Yisrael has in it an abbreviation for all the patriarchs and the matriarchs. That's what makes us Jews. Yisrael means a Jew, right? So what is a Jew? What is a Yisraeli? Who is an Israelite? Someone that has that attachment to the patriarchs and the matriarchs. And this is something that we bring up to God right at the very beginning of the prayers, is his covenant with the patriarchs and the matriarchs, the covenant with Abraham. And we read about the covenant with Abraham in the next section, which we're going to read, Akedas Yitzchak. And because covenant in Judaism is very important. Covenant is more than just Sometimes you have two people like each other, fine. Or two people are good friends and they like each other, so they do good things for each other. Or sometimes you even have like a closer relationship, a parent and a child, siblings, husband and wife, right? What is covenant? Covenant is that come what may. That's what a covenant is. When two people make a covenant with each other, they're basically saying that we promise to be there for each other in the good times and the bad times. Like a husband and wife, under the chuppah, they make a covenant. Not in our religion, but other religion, they say in the good times and the bad times, right? In the thick and the thin. When the sun will be shining and when it won't be shining. That's the promise we make for each other in marriage, is that we'll be there for each other when we're healthy and we're sick, when we're smiling and we're sad. So God made a covenant with the Jewish people, made a covenant with our patriarchs because he loved them. And he's made a promise to them. The promise is that I will be there with you in the good and the bad, in the thick and the thin. And so when we come before God, we come to Hashem, we say, yes, maybe we're not so good. Maybe we're imperfect. Maybe we're deserving of not such a good reward, a little less reward, maybe even some punishment. We're not going to go there. Right? But we have a covenant. And the covenant is you're stuck with us. You're trapped with us. We already promised us. We're good in the good and the bad. We're your people. We are your people. And you made a promise to us. And we're cashing in on that promise. We're cashing in today. We're coming to pray to you, Hashem, because you promised us. And when Hashem promises, we know he comes through. And that's important. Before davening, you come to Hashem and said, well, you promised us. There's a very famous Chabad family called the Shway family. And there's some people in Nashul actually that know them from Montreal. And they had a mother. She was a widow at a young age. She had 3 sons. And she was raising them in Russia during the communist regime. And as we know that the Jews during World War II, they ran to the east, like we spoke before about that. I mentioned my mother's family was the Polish Jews. But the Russian Jews, also they ran from Moscow and Leningrad, wherever they lived at the time, and they ran to the east. And most of the Chabad community were Russians. They ended up during the war in a place called Samarkand. Samarkand is in Uzbekistan, one of the stands, there are many stands in that part of the world. They're on the east side of Russia. Afghanistan, there's Tajikistan, there's Uzbekistan. A lot of, that's why a lot of Jewish people, the name is Stan. Because the Jews during the war, they stayed in the stands. And many of them went to a place called Samarkand or Tashkent in Uzbekistan. And there was this lady, she ran also to the east with her kids. And she didn't quite make it to Samarkand. And she was raising her kids in one of these, one called Siberia, and they called it Siberia in those days. It wasn't Mamish Siberia, but it was out in the east. Everything in the east they called Sibir. So she really wanted to send, she had the 3 sons, she was raising them single-handedly. She used to do work and babysit and try to put some money on the table, and she couldn't afford, and her kids. One day she's walking in the marketplace and she sees a Chabad guy there. And she says hello to him, and she asks him, where you're from? He says, from Samarkand. She says, oh, Samarkand, that's where the yeshiva is for the kids. My children are growing up over here in Eastern Russia, and they don't have a cheder, they don't have a school and nothing. I want to send my kid with you. He says, take my kid with you. Those days, it's a big danger. And she says, no, I'm sending you my oldest son. You got to take him to the yeshiva there. I know he'll be taken good care of. He's an orphan. Father has passed away, and he needs to go learn Torah. So she says, I have my oldest son. His name is Baruch Shalom. Please take him. And so she took him. She sent him with this guy, and he took him on the train, and it took him to Samarkand. The next year, he shows up again in this Siberian village or whatever, right? Again for business, and runs into the lady again. She says, thank you for taking my son to the yeshiva. Now my next son, Isaac, he's getting also old. And he says, what are you? I can't take your kids. I'm going to get myself into trouble taking a kid on the train. Those days it was danger with the Russians and to a yeshiva. She says, you must. Okay. She brings his pekel he takes him on the train and brings a second son to the yeshiva. And finally, the third year, he sees her, he runs the other direction. He says, I'm not. She says, she runs after, she says, I have my third son. I'm not taking your kid. Forget it. This is a danger. Anyways, the next thing he knows, he's on the train and he's going there. And she comes running to the train station and takes her son and throws him onto the train with his pekala. Take him for me to the yeshiva. And her third son, Yankel, youngest son, whatever, he was there went to Samarkand. So this lady, she's in a Siberian town somewhere. All of her three sons are in Samarkand. A year, and as she's throwing her last son onto the train, she said, Mommy, what's going to be? He's a young boy. She says, don't worry, Mommy's going to come see you soon. Mommy's going to see you soon. Anyways. So about a half a year later or something, she was homesick for the kids. And she made the journey. She made finally the trek to Samarkand. She figured out a way to get there. And she got there. In those days, it was the middle of the war, and there was bombs falling, and the train station was like crazy place. They were bringing survivors from the war on the gurneys. They were carrying them, the bodies from the soldiers, and it's a whole turmoil there. And she arrives in Samarkand. This lady, Munya, her name was, and she had already sent all three sons there. She comes to the train station, and she's walking around. And lo and behold, she sees her youngest son, the Yankel, her baby. So she says, Yankel, what are you doing here? What are you doing at the train station? He says, what do you mean why I'm doing the train station? You said you were coming to see me. Every day since I arrived in Samarkand, every day I go when the train comes there, I go there to greet you. She says, what? He says, Mama, you promised me. You promised me, and I know Mama keeps her promise. So every day for a half a year, this kid would come to the train station to go see his mother arriving. Finally, she did arrive. Mama, du hast mich gepromised. Mama, you promised me. Yeah? Du hast mich zugesagt. You promised me. When a mother promises something, a child depends on it. So when we come to daven before Hashem, Hashem gave us many promises. He promised us things will be good for the Jewish people. He promised us he'll send us the Mashiach. Mama, Tate, you promised us. And this is what we come when we come to pray. We come for the covenant because we believe in the covenant. So today is a very special day because there's big negotiations going on in Doha. Who knows what's going on in Doha? Anyways, Doha, Shmoa, the main thing is that the war should be over and the soldiers should come back home and there should be peace in Eretz Yisrael. And we turn to Hashem and we say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, Oseh shalom b'Mromav, Yaseh shalom aleinu. These are all promises that God gave us that there will be peace in the world and peace in Israel. So we don't come because of our merits to God. We come and say, God, you promised us. We are members of your covenant. When we come for a covenant, we're not coming here for this is a nuptial agreement. with God. Right? God told us certain things, the Torah. That's our agreement, our marriage agreement. We're coming to cash it in. We're coming to cash in the covenant. Mama, you promised us, you zugezakt. Don't let us down. That's what we come before Hashem. Before we daven every day, the first thing we mention is Avrohom Avinu, how he brought his son Yitzchak on the altar. And then God promised him, in the merit of your dedication to me, I will promise you to have a beautiful nation. I will bless them. I will bless them, as many as the stars in the heaven. Covenant time. We're cashing in. Bring us peace in the world. Bring us peace in Israel. Bring back our hostages. Bring back our soldiers. Bring back our normalcy. But we are not coming in our merits. We're coming in your merit, Hashem, so to speak. Please God, we should all merit to see the covenant being fulfilled speedily in our days, the coming of Mashiach Tzedkeinu b'meherav yameinu. Amen. Now you can daven with a new flavor. Any questions, anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Sonia.
If I may, I just wanted to add, I stayed there with my family, and it was exactly as you were saying, Rabbi, the story of my members of my family, except the trenches were digged by the people that were eventually shot there.
The local people.
They had to do it themselves.
Yeah.
And
true.
The Jews were sticking so much together, those that survived, and they helped each other incredibly.
Yeah.
Many of them went to Brooklyn, as you know. A number of these Jews are in Beersheba area, and they created their own stores. They have their own doctors, they have their own pharmacies, and they are grouped together from the memories of what you just were kind enough to tell us about. They are still drawing from that strength. And their children, I'm happy to tell you, are very successful.
Wow.
So it pains me even more that many of these young men are now in IDF and they are fighting again.
I can tell you.
It never stops.
Yeah, I want to tell you a great story how I saved the shul in Beersheba some other time. I just have a recent story, how I saved the shul in Beersheba through a story that I told. And I'll share it with you maybe next week about how there was a synagogue in Beersheba and they were considering whether to continue to build it or not. And there was a story there, an inspirational story that I shared. And the people there came over to me and said, your story, Rabbi, inspired us to finish building the shul in Beersheba.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
But I'll share that story with you.
Wow.
Maybe next week. Okay.
You're an influencer.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Have a great Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbos, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbos.
Thank you.
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.